All right, I'm Jane Diggs, and yes, I was the managing director of INROADS. Well, it was initially INROADS Charleston, and then about, I would say 6 or 7 years later, it changed to INROADS West Virginia. So I had the entire state plus a little bit of recruiting in Kentucky and Virginia and the western part of Virginia. I managed the entire operation. I did the fund development, the overall board development. I was the go-to person. If anyone in the West Virginia area had any questions about inroads, I was the go-to person. So I was the head person. Yes, I know initially starting in 79, Mort Stanfield hired me in the early part of 1979. So I was just a one-person staff. And of course, my staff eventually grew. Just meeting these wonderful interns and these wonderful individuals who I met as young as 13 or 14, because we had a very successful pre-college component. So just meeting them, I know when I first started, I recruited mainly engineering students for our companies throughout the state. And most of these individuals really didn't know what an engineer did. They thought the engineer was the person who was the engineer conductor on a train. And these students are very, very successful now. Many of my students are promising medical doctors and dentists. But not only the students who really made a difference in my life, I think INROADS made a difference in the INROADS interns' lives, but it made a difference in their parents' lives too, because the parents were wonderful. Because once again, I got these students in the pre-college component as young as 13 or 14. So I had to have that parental support. And to this day, their parents still remember me. Just going in and out of corporations was great. I know my biggest corporation at the time was Union Carbide. I was headquartered in Charleston, West Virginia, and Union Carbide had a huge presence there. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed being around the corporate individuals, being around the human resources people, because I could relate to that. But just interacting with the community people. I mean, people knew my students because they were the cream of the crop in West Virginia. So that made me feel good because they made me look good. So to this day, I guarantee you can find wonderful comments on Facebook. I guess half of my Facebook friends are my former INROADS students, and many of their parents and husbands and wives. But it influenced me too, because I know I spent approximately 12 and a half years with INROADS. And what I did after I left, I don't think I could have done that with the zeal and the aspirations that I had. I mean, when I left INROADS, I knew that I could walk on water because I had seen it all. I know after I left INROADS at the end of 1991, I started my own employment agency in West Virginia and Kentucky, and then eventually moved to Connecticut. So I know for a fact I could not have done all of that. But I think INROADS not only impacted my students, but I think it really impacted me more, because your movers and shakers and your politicians, they all saw me. So when I asked them for money, even when I was a part of INROADS, and even when I left INROADS, I never got a no. I never got a no, because they knew the work that I did. They knew about the mission. They definitely knew about the mission, and it was a 100% great organization. With Union Carbide, actually Union Carbide was very instrumental in bringing us to Charleston, West Virginia. Duncan Ragg, he was in charge of human resources at the South Charleston plant. The South Charleston plant was one of the largest plants in the world for Union Carbide. So we started with 17 interns. And that first year in 1979, we had approximately 8 or 9 students at Union Carbide and several other companies, such as Appalachian Power, Columbia Gas Transmission, a couple of the banks, and some of the other smaller chemical companies too. So we had the Monsanto, the Dow Chemical Company, because we were situated not in the South, but really the Southeast. So many of the companies that I just mentioned, such as Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, Monsanto, DuPont, most of your major Fortune 500 chemical companies were my sponsoring companies, not only in Charleston, West Virginia, which of course is the capital of West Virginia, but in places such as Parkersburg or Huntington. We even had a company, Ashland Oil in Ashland, Kentucky. So as well as West Vaco in Maryland. So it wasn't just the emphasis on the chemical companies, but we had some great banks too. We had, let's see, Kanawha Valley Bank, and I'm just trying to think of the other bank. There was a smaller bank, but now it's a larger bank. It's the Fifth Third Street Bank. Yes, so they were like a Charleston National Bank at the time, but now it's a Fifth Third Bank. The main challenges was really recruiting the engineering students. The majority of my students were engineering students. I know the emphasis was on placement of talented minorities in business and engineering. Engineering was tough. I don't know if you've been to engineering school. I didn't. It's tough. And because you just mentioned the chemical companies, most of my corporations were chemical companies. So they didn't want accountants. They didn't want business people or history majors. I'm a history major, by the way, Regan. They wanted chemical engineers. That was the challenge. And that's why we had to go back and develop this pre-college component. The challenge was getting these students as 9th and 10th graders to think about Algebra 1, Algebra 2, trigonometry, and geometry, and take them through as a high school graduating senior, and then going into a Marshall University or perhaps a West Virginia University or Virginia Tech and major in engineering, some sort of engineering, but really the emphasis was on chemical engineering because I had all of your major chemical corporations, and it worked. Many of my students are still working. Some of them are retiring, but then many of them who went into chemical engineering are now doing well as medical doctors. But another challenge was getting the students, because let's just say if I had a student who was at Virginia Tech, which is about a 3-hour drive, Blacksburg, Virginia to Charleston, West Virginia, but they didn't actually live in Charleston, West Virginia, and they worked in the summer as an intern at Union Carbide, but they were from the southern part of the state, or even in Morgantown, which is very close to Pittsburgh. We had to provide them with living arrangements wherever their internship was. So that was a challenge in itself. But my students, because they were engineering students, they made some good money. They made top dollar. And I'm talking about the early 80s and 90s. They made top dollars as engineering students. Also, we had the monthly career development workshops. So for example, if I had a student who was going to school at North Carolina A&T, many of my students graduated from North Carolina A&T or at Tennessee State or Virginia Tech, they had to come into Charleston, West Virginia, our headquarters, for monthly workshops. So getting them there to say, we're going to do this workshop on whatever, on interviewing skills, or you need to see your sponsoring company, and just getting them there for those workshops was really tough because it was an expense item out of their pocket. And many of these students, came out of homes where, if you were in Nashville, or even if you were at Pitt, and you had to come to West Virginia for a monthly workshop. That was really tough. People saw me as the go-to person for advice on careers, advice on personal development. A couple of the local colleges, such as West Virginia State College, even West Virginia University, West Virginia Institute of Technology, my alma mater, would contact me for expertise as well as training and development. But just to take that just a bit further, because I recruited and I was in the talent development, that was my transitioning out of INROADS to start my company, my employment agency. And I had the blessings of everyone, and I did extremely well. It helped me in my overall creativity. I mean, I travel all over the Northeast. I went in and out of corporations. So when I started my own employment agency, I had no problems making that entry or knocking on the door. Knocking on the door after I left INROADS was easy for me. It really was. It really was. And it looked good on my resume. You know, it's funny that you ask that. I don't know if you know Mort Stanfield. He was my mentor. Wonderful person. In fact, prior to coming to INROADS, I'll never forget this. I was working as the college counselor at Job Corps. We have one of the largest Job Corps in America in downtown Charleston, West Virginia. Mort came to my office at Job Corps. I don't even know how he got through security and started interviewing me. I'm like, it was unbelievable. I didn't really think that INROADS could work at the time because of the limited minority population in the state, and definitely in Charleston, West Virginia. I know in the early 80s, there was, in terms of the overall minority population, it was only about 3%. So I had some questions about that, just determining if that was doable, the overall recruitment, and if I would look good, because I know prior to INROADS Charleston developing in 1979, there were 6 cities. So we were actually coming in as one of the smallest cities. So I didn't really know if we could really compete on the same level. But after I got my foot wet and saw the students and with the parental support and the corporate support, I said, you know, this is a done deal. This one young man, he was from the coal fields. And once again, he became a chemical engineer. He was from Southern West Virginia. He knew nothing about being an engineer. Once again, he thought that engineers drove the trains. I went to Virginia Tech in Lawrenceburg. He worked at Union Carbide Corporation. After he graduated, he got married. I went to his wedding, and I think I probably have attended probably about 10 or 12 different weddings. Just being on Facebook now and just seeing them and seeing their children. I mean, it's really amazing. And then just bumping into some of my former students, former INROADS, in places like Miami, and they're hopping over carts to say, wait a minute, I know you. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. It really is. But also another remarkable experience is just interacting with the other, my colleagues, such as Mort Stanfield. He's my mentor, by the way. And I can remember Mort. He had a certain way where you had to dress, and you had to look the part. You couldn't have the flashy earrings back in the early 80s. You couldn't wear the short dresses. So I guess he was always on me for that, because I was a very flashy person. I was pregnant in 1983 during my tenure with INROADS. So I just had to make certain that I looked a certain way and I had to look professional, even though I was wobbling up to training sessions and wobbling to University of Pittsburgh or Morgantown or WVU. You always had to look your best. And it really taught me, INROADS taught me about being professional, not only for the students, but you always had to look professional at all times, at all times. But just meeting the other INROADS directors, such as Pam Shaw or Pat Coulter or Jane Smith, and we always kept in touch because most of the INROADS directors, they spent at least 10 years a max with INROADS. I spent approximately 13 years with INROADS. So just the interaction with them, it was a wonderful experience. One young man said, I saved his life. And I said, you know what? Wait a minute, because he was a part of my pre-college component. So I knew him going back as a ninth grader. And he said, I really didn't put the emphasis on what I should have done. He said I was a knucklehead, but I turned it all around. And he said, because of the emphasis that you put on me, that you always have to be your best, you made a difference in my life. I was on Facebook about 2 weeks ago. It was a young lady who she's currently with she's an accountant. She just got a promotion and she's currently with the Atlanta Aquarium, a very good promotion, I want to say. And she wrote me to say that you made a difference in my life in INROADS. It's because I didn't have that much confidence in myself, but with the career development workshops and what you kept saying to me that, you've got to think good about yourself, that really made a difference. That really made a difference in my life. I have a couple of alums. In fact, I believe we did a good job. I know I did a good job in INROADS, West Virginia, because some of my alums, their sons and daughters are part of the INROADS organization. There was this one young man, and I believe you may have interviewed him, or perhaps Bob, Steve Easley. He was an engineer, by the way, West Virginia University graduate, and Union Carbide intern, civil engineer. His son went into INROADS, and he speaks very, very highly of INROADS. So I've had quite a number of my INROADS alums who I recruited as 14 or 15 or 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, whose sons or daughters are now INROADS students. That makes me feel good. It makes me feel old, but it makes me feel good. Yes, just meeting Frank Carr. I know in 1979, he came to Charleston, West Virginia. He also interviewed me. But, after he left, and I remember the last time I saw Frank, it was in 1990. There was a Northeast Regional conference with all the managers and the workers. And we went to his parish in Arizona. And just seeing him there with his cloth, because he'd become a priest, it was just amazing, just amazing. Frank Carr, as well as Mort Stanfield, they really made a difference in my life. And it was just amazing what Frank did in his life. And he didn't start INROADS until he was in his 60s. That was amazing. Just his vision of what INROADS could look like. I mean, just my vision, because we were the seventh city. When we came in 79, there were 3 cities that came in with us. But now it's an amazing organization with wonderful students who are doing extremely well. It makes me feel good. It really makes me feel good.